Most of you have heard the Christmas story many times over in your life, and I wonder, have you ever heard it and associated with someone who was in the story? Maybe your life's at a place where you're confused over something new that's transpired in your life, and you thought, I kind of resonate with Mary this year because, there was so much confusion, and I have to decide that I can be humble and willing to obey whatever's unfolding in my life. Maybe you'd say, sometimes I feel kind of like Joseph, like something's just recently gotten dropped into my life, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do with it, and I got hard decisions to make, but I feel like God needs to give me strength to be brave, to push forward and to find a way. Maybe some of you associate with the shepherds, kind of the blue-collar guys, and you're like, yeah, you know what, I kind of get out there in the morning, I go out there and I work day in and day out. Probably feel underappreciated sometimes, and yet the Lord is kind of moving in your life, and you're like, there's some things I need to discover, just like the shepherds discovered who God was. Maybe you feel like the busy innkeeper sometimes. He's the unknown person in the story that apparently indicated there was no room in the inn, and you feel like you're so busy, and you feel like this voice is saying to you, as we talked about last week, slow down, slow down, slow down. Maybe you feel like the patient God follower, like the priests who were in the temple that were waiting for God to do what he had promised. Maybe some of you feel like your life's kind of been in a waiting room lately, and you believe God and you trust him, but you're waiting, and sometimes you're exhausted waiting on him, and you're hoping that the answers from God are coming soon. And there's all kinds of characters in this story, and maybe at some point you've heard a sermon preached, you thought, I'm a lot like that person, that situation's a lot like mine. But can I speak from my own personal experience, and I think I can safely speak for you today when I say there is one person in this story that we never would want to associate ourselves with or say that we're anything like, and it's King Herod. Folks, he is the villain of Christmas, all right? He's like Scrooge times 10. He's way meaner than the mean one, Mr. Grinch. All right, Herod, he is horrid. Apart from this story, let me tell you historically some information that we know about Herod. Now, Herod was an incredibly astute politician. He, in a dog-eat-dog world of the Roman Empire, found himself as top dog again and again and again. Herod even accomplished something that was unheard of in his day. There was this big fight that went on in Rome. There was this schism between a guy named Antony and a guy named Augustus over who would follow behind the first Caesar. And Herod was good friends with Antony, and he sided with Antony, and Antony lost. And Augustus became the second Caesar. When that happened, everybody figured Herod's done. His options are basically he can kill himself or he can wait for Augustus to send people to kill him. Do you know what Herod did? As soon as he learned that Augustus had won and was now Caesar, Herod got on a boat, went straight to Rome, walked right up to the gates, knocked on the door, and said, I need to see Caesar. Walked in, fell on his knees before Caesar, and said, if you understand how passionately I served Antony while he was alive, I promise you, I will serve you twice as passionately. Caesar was so impressed at Herod's boldness, he not only let him go back to Judea and continue to rule, but he gave him additional area as well. Herod was shrewd. He was extraordinarily wealthy. He owned, we know, at least 4 palaces, each one more grand than the next. One excavation recently has unearthed a swimming pool at his one palace that is large enough to put current-day ships in. Herod was such an amazing architect and prolific builder that they eventually gave him the name Herod the Great because of the greatness of the things he built. But no one considered him Herod the Great for how they felt about him personally. He was deeply hated by the Jewish people. Now, part of it was because he himself was not fully Jewish. He had some Jewish ancestry, but the people never truly recognized him as he was with their king. But a few years into Herod's reign, Rome declared that Herod's official title would be King of the Jews. And so Herod the Great, who was not so great, was recognized by Rome as King of the Jews, a title which caused the people to chafe, but Herod to croon. He constantly reminded them who he was. Now, perhaps Herod's greatest problem was that he so zealously wanted to protect his position that he would do anything, and I do mean anything, to defend and maintain his power. If nothing else, he wanted to rule and be in control of his life. In fact, let's represent that today one more time, going back to our manger. Each week, as you know, we've been putting something in the manger. And so today, you can see there is a crown in the manger. Herod loved his. He wore it not only with pride, but he wore it with tremendous defense. In fact, Herod was so concerned about maintaining his crown that he was paranoid, tremendously paranoid. If anyone or any circumstance at all appeared to be threatening his rule, he would stop it immediately and ferociously. As an example to you of just how paranoid Herod was, Herod had multiple children, and he would choose only one that could be the son that would follow behind him, that would take his throne after he died. And so Herod chose a particular son and said, "You're the one I choose. You're the one who will follow behind me when I die." However, at some point, Herod got nervous about that son. Perhaps he'll get itchy for the throne and want it sooner and kill me. And so Herod killed that son instead. Then he chose another son. He did exactly the same thing. He chose a third son and did it again. And after that, it caused Caesar Augustus to say this: "It's safer to be Herod's sow than to be Herod's son." I'd like to imagine that you were one of the 4 other sons that remained, and Herod walked in and said, "I'm thinking about making you heir to the throne." "No, Dad, it's okay, really. I never wanted to be king." Can you imagine how tightly and aggressively he wanted to rule his life? His power, his autonomy, being in charge, he lived for that. In Herod's 40s, multiple years after he'd begun to reign at about the age of 35 or so, he came to believe that a certain household called the Hasmoneans were plotting to take over his throne. And so he went after them viciously and wiped them out. The only problem was his wife, Mariamne, she was part of the Hasmonean house. And though historians tell us that Mariamne may have been the only wife that Herod ever loved, in his paranoia, in his longing to keep his crown, he had even her killed. Some say shortly thereafter is when he fully lost his mind. By the time we meet the Herod of this story, he's been reigning as this kind of vicious, paranoid despot for 35 years in Judea. He's 70 years old, and he is sick. Historians tell us he had some kind of debilitating disease that, as we look back at now, we believe was severe kidney problems. He was in tremendous pain. In fact, he was in so much pain. Not long from when this story is told, earlier than this, he actually attempted suicide, but his own nephew found him and saved him. Herod knew how hated he was. Herod knew there wasn't a person in the world who'd be sorry when he was gone. And so the sicker Herod became, he finally wrote a command that said this: the soldiers are to gather up the most popular and the wealthiest men of Jerusalem upon knowledge of my illness that will end in death. They are to jail them. And upon my death, within the first hour of my death, all of those men are to be killed, so that there will be mourning in Jerusalem, so that upon my death, at least someone will mourn. The soldiers did indeed gather those men up. Gratefully, upon the death of Herod, they did not follow up that command, and those men were released. Approximately just one short year before Herod died is the story that we have today of the Magi arriving in Jerusalem. Now, there are many opinions about these men. And without a lot of hard knowledge, we don't know a whole lot that we can say for sure. This we know: they came from a long distance, and they came from the east. And one of the things we're pretty sure of is that they did not arrive at the manger. Now, for those of you who are looking overnight and saying, well, Pastor Todd, I'm a little concerned because I look over and I see a king, because we kind of refer to him as king. I see a Magi there in the manger scene. So what's going on? Well, to be truthful to you, if we wanted to kind of represent that correctly, maybe we'd have to move him like halfway down the aisle or put him out near the foyer so that we'd have like the nativity scene going on, and the Magi are on their way. Now, there's varying opinions about why they didn't arrive when Jesus was born. The most prolific opinion is this: they were being led by a group of men, so they never stopped and asked directions. And all the men said, amen to that. Better to arrive late and proud, right? So, for those of you who are uptight about this, and are building your own manger scene at home at Christmas, in the future, what you do, just set up the whole nativity scene in the living room. Just take the king and his camels and the gifts and all that, set them up on the kitchen counter and say they're on their way, okay? But let me tell you why I'm not uptight about doing this, so I can just set you at ease. And it's for this reason. A nativity scene is a snapshot representation of all that surrounded the coming of Jesus to earth. And the story of the Magi coming is part of that big picture that we get. And so to simplify and to give us that one singular vision, we just take those guys and hurry them up a little bit, and we stick them in the manger scene. But in reality, it was probably between a year and even close to 2 years after the birth of Jesus at which the Magi arrive in Jerusalem. They knock on Herod's front door. And the servants open the door, probably to quite a scene. We don't know exactly how many were in their contingent. For years we've romanticized it. It was 3. There are even some that have given names to these 3. But in reality, we get that number 3 because there are 3 gifts. But even if there were 3 just leading the group, this would be an extraordinarily not only difficult but dangerous journey in which they are bringing 3 valuable gifts. Undoubtedly, there was quite a retinue of people with them, quite a group that came. It caused, we learn, quite a stir for Herod when they arrived. In fact, the scripture says that not only Herod, but all of Jerusalem was now uptight. Well, if you knew what kind of history Herod had, and they did, and someone shows up like this, it's no wonder everybody would be in a stir. And here's what I want you to see. They arrive and they ask this question of Herod: where is the one, see the word, born King of the Jews? Say that with me. Where is the one born King of the Jews? Do you remember how Herod became King of the Jews? He clawed and scratched and pulled and stepped on others to get to the position of King of the Jews. And here come these regal men who knock on Herod's front door and say, where is the one who rightfully is born as the King of the Jews? How do you think that question's set with Herod? I think the text tells us, not very good. And Herod calls the priest in. Herod's supposed to be Jewish, but he ain't Jewish enough to know this, and he ought to know it. And those priests look back and they recall this famous passage, and they say to him, hey, you know what? If these guys are here and they're claiming that the King of the Jews has finally been born, well, Herod, let me tell you where that's going to be, or where that has happened. It happened in Bethlehem. Do you know how far Bethlehem was from Herod's Jerusalem palace? 6 miles. 6 miles. In other words, on that day, Herod learned that the real king of the Jews was 6 miles away, learning to walk. Grabbing onto the coffee table, bumping his head up against the fireplace. Herod learned the true king of the Jews, in fact, the king of the universe, is a mere 6 miles from him. Here is a man dying. Here is a man who knows he doesn't have that many more days left on this earth. Little left for him to worry about. But his primary thought is this: how dare someone challenge me in ruling my world? His crown is the center of his world. And that's why Herod will never have peace. Because I tell you, the more tightly we hold onto our own autonomy, the more tightly we try to control our own lives, the more unwilling we are to surrender rulership of our lives to anyone else, the less peace we will ever have. And Herod is without peace. He's unwilling to confess, even to consider that maybe there is a rightful king greater than himself. So guess what he does? He sends them off to worship, and he refuses. In fact, he plots. How can I make sure that no one ever tries to make a claim over my life, or all that I claim is rightfully mine? And we have to ask ourselves, why is it that there are wise men who are willing to come hundreds or even thousands of miles to worship Jesus, but in the midst of wise men, there's a fool who won't even go 5 miles to discover anything? Now you might say, you might find that an interesting question, Pastor Todd, but why would I care? Why do I care what Herod did or didn't do? He's about to disappear off the face of the earth anyway. And I fear you aren't going to like the answer to the question, why should you care? Because I don't like saying it. But the reason that question matters very much today is because there is a little Herod in all of us. There's a little Herod in all of us. You say, Pastor Todd, I know the rest of this story. Herod's going to kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem. Pastor Todd, I couldn't even injure another adult, no less kill one innocent child, no less kill a town full of innocent children. How could you ever make any comparison between me or yourself and Herod? Here's the comparison. It's too easy for us to refuse to lay down the crown of our lives and surrender control to anyone. And so we live with a lack of peace in our own lives because we refuse to be outranked by God when it comes to our own personal lives. Let me repeat that for you. we have no peace in our lives because we refuse to be outranked by God when it comes to our personal lives. We don't like the idea of surrendering control of our life to someone else. Why is that? Well, for some of us, perhaps it's because it would involve too much transparency. I wonder if one of the reasons Herod refused to make that 6-mile journey himself was he was afraid of what he would find. Would the true nature of his own character be revealed when he looked into the eyes of the Son of God? You see, I think there are 2 reasons why we draw back and refuse to give our lives to God. Why we continue to wear the crown and want to sit on the throne of our own lives. And the first is this. I think we know that surrender will reveal things in us. Surrender will reveal things in us. I warn you that when you surrender to God, He'll reveal you to you. In fact, the closer you get to Him, the more He will lovingly pull back the veil and reveal to you things about yourself. I remember a time in my own life when I was pursuing particularly hard after God in prayer and in fasting and in time in His Word. And the result was twofold. Not only a new beauty of His closeness in my life, but also I began to see the things that God wanted to remove in my life. He revealed to me ingrown pride. He revealed and challenged me about some of my own ways of thinking, about how I hid underneath masks what was really there in the center of my heart. Some of you are hesitant to abandon yourself to God because you're afraid to take an honest look at letting Him rule your life would allow Him to take an honest look at you with a gaze you could not avoid. And you say, Pastor Todd, I wouldn't want you to know my darkest thoughts. Pastor Todd, I wouldn't want you to be able to see me at my worst. And you worry about me because I'm your pastor. And by the way, I've learned people worry a lot about what I think. It's amazing what people hide because I walk into a room as if somehow I am the sight of God. Yet there is nothing in all of the universe hidden from our God. We fool ourselves when we think by holding back lordship of our lives, we keep God from seeing who we really are. He already sees who we really are. And when we surrender to Him, He will help us to see what we've really become. That's not easy. But let me show you the second thing. It's not only that surrender reveals things in us, it's that surrender will require things of us. We don't hold back just because what He might discover. We hold back because of what He might require. What He might ask of us. You see that little boy? He's not going to stay a little boy forever. He's going to grow up to be a man, and he's going to grow up to be the kind of man that's going to challenge people around him to a way of life that is different than what we would naturally do. It'll be different than their neighbors and their friends. It'll be different than the way their enemies live. And you'll say, are you willing to live that way? Recently, my son and I were riding down the road, and Clay said to me, Dad, why in the world would people know how much God loves them, hear the story of Christmas and how Jesus came for them, and still refuse to give their lives to Him and love Him back? Clay, that's a great question. And we kicked it around together for a while. And I said, I think one of the reasons is because we know that if we say yes to Jesus and we give our lives surrendered to Him, He will ask us for some things that we don't want to do. He'll ask us to surrender some things that we don't want to give up. He'll ask us to begin some things that we don't want to start. Do you realize that when Jesus came, He talked to us about living holy lives, different than the world around us. He said, I'm called you to be a people of holiness, that he'll begin to inspect the way we think and the way we talk and the way we act and the way we joke. And he'll begin to say of us, are you willing to follow me even to the point of living a holy life? Are you willing to recognize that one of the things he might require of us is that we be the mature person in relationships so that we set the standard and we become an example of what it is to be a Christian? Do you realize that he may come to you and say, hey, you know what? I know what it is to be hateful. I understand that so many people around you are difficult, but I'm calling you to be kind. I'm asking you to love people that aren't very lovable. I'm asking you to pray for your enemies and do good to those who do bad to you. That he will come to us and say, I'm calling you to be generous. I'm calling you perhaps to bypass some things that you normally would simply do for yourself and give them to the things that I'm going to tell you to do. And suddenly we begin to say, God, wait a minute. I kind of like to still wear the crown in this area, and this area. You can have this area, that one, and the one over there. Because we kind of think, wouldn't it be great if we could acknowledge God, but not have to fully worship him? Can't I just kind of make my peace with him without getting on my knees before him? Can't I just kind of high-five God once a week by coming to church? And say, yeah, there you are. Can't I just kind of call him the big guy upstairs? We're good, God, right? We're good? I was here this week. I'm coming twice. It's Christmas week. God, I'm coming twice. It's going to be great Christmas, right? Can't I just do that? You see, there's no such thing as going halfway with God. It's an oxymoron. It doesn't exist. It's like saying I'm half pregnant. It's like saying, are you enlisted or not? Well, I'm half enlisted. Folks, either you are or you aren't. Either you did or you didn't. There's just no such thing as being half a Christian. There's no way to say, I'm going to acknowledge God, but I'm not going to worship him, and then at the same time believe we're Christians. Oh, no. You see, because those who come before God and say, you are the king, they get on their knees. You see, the Bible says when the Magi found Jesus, at the end of all that journey, it says they bowed before him and opened their gifts. Can you imagine if these three guys had come that far? Only at the very end, when they're finally in his presence, to go, well, that was a long trip, and that's an amazing star, and yes, you're king of the universe, but I think we'll remain standing. Are you kidding me? How can you come that far and not finish? And some of you have come so far. God's been revealing himself to you. You've started coming to church and hearing things, and he's been knocking on the door of your heart, and you just know that he's been calling out to you, and you sense it, and for a long time, you've been kind of saying, I really ought to, and I really should, and maybe someday I will, and here you are at this moment. Why would you come this far and then refuse to surrender to him? To lay your crown at his feet? Are you more like the wise men? Are you more like that fool Herod, who will do what is ever necessary to preserve and protect and control? Many of you say, I have reasons why I'm afraid to become a Christian. Really fully surrender myself to God. And probably if some of you gave me some of those reasons, I would probably understand why logically you felt why you have. Some say you have no idea what I've been through in this life, or you have no idea how bad that one church hurt me or those 10 churches hurt me. And we use reasons and excuses and cover-ups for why we're not willing to get on our knees before God and surrender our life to him. But deep inside of you today, there is this recognition that the light shines in the darkness and the darkness can't overcome it. And that light continues to light your path and draw you to Him. Be like the wise men who said, we've come so far. How could we do anything but cast our crowns at His feet? I've been to Bethlehem, and I don't mean Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I've been to Bethlehem in the Middle East. It's special. I'd like to take you all, and let's go, all right? We're going to make a way, and we're going to go. But my wife and I have been there. Bethlehem's a busy, busy city, but the center of the city, of course, is the Church of the Nativity. Church of Nativity was originally built by Constantine when Rome became officially Christian about 400 years after Jesus' birth and death, resurrection. And what they did was they built this big church, which, by the way, has been knocked down and remodeled and remodeled and remodeled and remodeled times and times and times again since then. But the interesting thing is, you go to lots of places and go, well, we think this or we think that. But the interesting thing about what they call the grotto is by about 150 A.D., that was already the spot that they were saying, this is the cave. And when I say the cave, let me help you understand. We talk about a manger and a place in a stable. The word there for stable and the idea of manger is really that Jesus probably was just born kind of in this deep, dark, hewn-out cave somewhere. That was the spot. I know some of you want to picture that barn that we got out here on the North Campus, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't like barn. It was cave. And by 150 AD, so I'm not here to try to sell you on whether that's a real place or not, inconsequential, but the interesting thing is this. The cave there has always had this small entrance, difficult to get through, and when they built the church up over top of it, they didn't change that. And so when you get there, you walk up to this magnificent church that's divided up into 4 different Christian groups that share it. Wouldn't that be interesting? Come in on Sunday morning. Walk to the left if you're with the Wesleyans, down to the right with the Baptists, Pentecostals are over in the back corner, and all you Lutherans, we've got it nice and quiet up in the front corner for you. Wouldn't it be interesting? But you go there, and it's all this church owned by these 4 different groups, right? So you walk in this magnificent church, but then forget the magnificence of the church. You go over to, there's this little door, and you open it up. And to get through the door, you got to crouch down way low. And there's steps in front of you. And by the time you reach that first step, you're really almost on your knees. And I've always just thought it was so appropriate. And sweetheart, to this day, I have flashbulb memory of being in that grotto. So appropriate that going to the place where Jesus was born, you still approach Him on your knees. And I want you to know, the question is valid. In your life, are you going to be more like the wise men? Or are you going to be more like Herod? Because let me say this, and we'll close. And this is an awful serious way to close. But I, as I was writing this, I could not avoid this truth. I don't know at what point Herod finally began to regret all he had done. Maybe he never did. But I want to tell you this. To protect your own kingdom, someday you'll begin to do things you regret. To make sure that no one else ever gets over on you, including God, you will eventually be pushed to decisions that you'll be sorry you ever made. You may become someone you don't even recognize. You will make poor decisions. You will hurt people. You're not going to go out and murder children, but you may kill some relationships and destroy some reputations along the way. You will deaden your conscience, and ultimately, you'll answer in eternity for your refusal of God. You see, it's really the same question today as then. Are you willing to put Jesus at the center, not only of this season or your life? Or do you want to keep your own crown? The choice is yours. Personally, in my life, I've gotten on my knees. I've taken the crown of the rulership of my life off of my head, and I have laid it before Jesus. And He now rules my life. And He does such a better job of it than I ever could do. today. Don't be like the fool Herod. Be like the wise men. Cast your crown at his feet. I want us to bow our heads together today.